Hello, I'm Patrick Milligan from Rhino A&R, and we're here today with Robert Margouleff talking about the new Rhino High Fidelity edition of Freedom of Choice by DEVO. Robert was the producer of that record and a synthesizer expert from the beginning of synthesizers, basically, and brought a lot of that to this record. And we're going to talk about a lot of that today and his work with Stevie Wonder and get into his background and fascinating story.
I discovered the synthesizer. I was busy making a underground movie called Chow Manhattan. In the process of that, I discovered the Moog synthesizer, and that started to work very, very well. So I started programming and learning how to play, and no one has written any books on that kind of stuff at that point. Bob Moog used to come sometimes.
I was going to say, you knew him and worked with him, and sort of as he was developing the
he
sort
was
of...
a great friend.
Yeah.
Not super intense, but he would come down every time we had a problem with the synthesizer. He'd come down with his little toolbox and a clump of transistors and sit on the floor in the studio and fix this and adjust that, because it was relatively a new thing all the way around. When I met DEVO, it's a story in itself.
Yeah, I was going to ask how you got together with them, how that came about.
My accountant guy called me. He said, "You heard of this band called DEVO?" I said, "I think I've seen them a couple of times at the nightclub, the Starwood." I said, "Yeah, I've seen them." And he said, "Well, they're looking for somebody to record their album. They'd really sort of been burned a little bit, I felt, with the earlier producers, who in actuality wanted to put their own signature production style, superimpose that on top of the band."
Mm-hmm.
And when I heard them, a good producer knows when to leave something alone. When it's there,
they don't
respect
fit a
the art.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was always an open book with Steve or with DEVO. So a meeting is set up through DEVO's management for DEVO to come and meet me and Howard, who is my co-conspirator in engineering and my left-hand man, right-hand man. And we were sitting in the traffic office, which opened on the parking lot with all the cars parked there, and we're to meet DEVO. So we're sitting there, and this black Volkswagen pulls into the parking lot with all the windows fogged over. And the door opens, and you cannot miss them. It's DEVO. And they're all wearing the same coveralls with the black rubber hip boots up to the knee, rubber boots. And they had hard hats with a container on the side with a hose that came out and went up their noses. Okay? And they were all covered in grease. And I mean, we've seen a lot of people at the record plant. I mean, John Lennon would walk into the record plant, or any major person would walk into the record plant. Prince, somebody, right? Major. No one is nonplussed. Everyone's just doing their thing. Everything's taken for granted. When these guys got out of the car, the place went completely bonkers. And I said, "Oh, wow, what am I got myself into this time?" But they came into the studio, and the real reason was that they were on a lunch break from the Neil Young movie, and they were posing as nuclear waste managers, and they were all highly radioactive. So they arrived in the parking lot like that, and the studio went completely crazy. They totally lost their cool, and we gave them a tour of the studio with that on. And then they went back to Neil Young's place to finish their afternoon shoot. But it was a very different way to meet the band.
Yeah, it sounds like
Yeah.
Nobody else could look like that, for sure. That's very DEVO.
Yeah, they're really smart guys. Okay.
I've definitely
They're highly
picked up on that,
sophisticated. They're not just a bunch of guys in dirty undershirts, that's for sure.
Yeah.
We set the drums up acoustically in the studio, which was really wonderful because it was a beautiful acoustic space. But the rest of the band I brought into the control room, and they really didn't expect that. And I put rear monitors in like I had with Stevie, and it became, a really musical experience. You could feel the kick drum do this.
Yeah.
Okay? Which is very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Instead of having the band as an object where they would all play in the studio, then trudge into the control room, and the vibe would be broken. Then they'd listen and say, "Oh, we got to do this, we got to do that," with them right in the control room.
Yeah.
And Alan looking through the window was the only one with headphones. It was like performing on stage. It made it much more subjective, whereas versus most people think of a recording as an objective experience. Here's the stage with the four guys in their dirty undershirts and jeans and tushy cracks showing, playing on the stage here, and you're sitting back here, and you're regarding that image, and that's what you think you want to present. But when you move subjectively into the room where you become a part of the music, is something that we're really just coming to terms with now, 50 years later, right?
Yep.
But it gave the boys a chance to be more on stage, more impulsive, less, isolated. There's eye contact, there's motion, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the studio like that. Basically, way we worked with Steve, especially with motion and directionality, was something, and electronica, of course, was something that I learned a lot from one of my great teachers named Stevie Wonder. I brought that kind of energy, that kind of perspective of recording R&B into DEVO's field of view. And part of the reasons that I think they selected me to work with them was because their heroes were Stevie Wonder and Prince. So we had a lot in common, and about integrating electronica with live instruments. But you listen to those records, they're very, very simple.
They are.
I used the same formula I used with Stevie on the DEVO album. I always record the drums from the drummer's point of view, for example, which puts the hi-hat on the left and the low tom on the right, okay? Why did I do that? Because when you walk into the studio or into a room and there's a set of trap drums playing, you're at 10 feet away, they're mono. You're listening to all the waveforms combined. Immediately it's mono or kind of stereo because you have two ears. But the only person who really hears the drums truly in stereo is the player. So I wanted to make sure that we recorded the drums from the drummer's POV. And that is evident in all of my work, including the work on DEVO. That you say, well, how does DEVO relate to R&B? Well, that's one of the relationships. I did it because when Steve put on his headphones, the ability to sonically know where the drums were physically was just as important as the sound.
That makes a lot of sense.
And that motion, for example, is as musical as any other part of rhythm track. But it gave him the perspective of helping him be able to localize where each drum was. And that started me thinking very carefully about how I wanted to record every instrument. Recording a piano, like on Boogie on Reggae Woman, for example. Left hand piano down here, there's a microphone at the foot of the piano and one at the head of the piano, because as he moved up and down the keyboard, that motion itself is also musical.
Right, and from his perspective.
That consciousness of perspective really boiled over when I got to DEVO, which was 10 years later, basically. But we did it, and we were really getting along with it. Stevie came on the scene, and we took him downstairs to Studio B. We had already moved the synthesizer down there, and we started working that very day. And we just started recording, and the next 5 years was a fever dream of creativity and energy.
What an amazing run of records, and just so distinctive in what you brought to those records, and just because it's really some of the most really integrated and musical use of the synthesizer, certainly in R&B. I mean, it made those records completely unique. It just changed his sound into something completely different. It's remarkable what you guys did.
Well, it really, in a lot of ways, we weren't a bunch of scientists about it. It was based on feelings.
Right.
When he first came into the room and we showed him the synthesizer, of course, being blind, and he's very particular about saying blind and not unsighted. Okay. He put his hands all over the instrument, and he says, "Well, turn it on, let's play it." And he started trying to play chords on it. Of course, "Robert, Robert, it's broken. Something's not working. I only sing. And Malcolm says, yeah, it's like a saxophone, Steve, or a trumpet. One voice, one key on each keyboard. That voice could be a multitude of sounds. It is really a layered creation, each sound together. But you never played chords. It was not a polyphonic instrument. It was a monophonic instrument, basically. But it was an event when you pushed the key down. Steve got into it immediately. He totally got it. And we put all the instruments that we thought he would play and needed to play in a big circle in the studio, and he learned all where the stairs were and the doors and everything else. And we put a live mic in the control room so he could hear in his headphones all the time what we were talking about. It was the window to the control room disappeared. And that weekend we cut 17 tracks.
Wow.
I mean, it was crazy. And
Did all
after
those
that,
get
for the
used?
next 5 years, I didn't know what the hell happened,
Yeah.
really.
Well, I should just mention that the Rhino High Fidelity treatment to freedom of choice, and we always like to get somebody to do notes for it that was involved in the making of the record to give some background of how it was made, get into the geeky details, just why the record sounds the way it does. And for this, Robert was kind enough to write notes for us, and I have to tell you, you cannot wait to read these. They're the best note in the series so far, I think. It's
I'm
like
really
being
flattered. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for doing it. They're truly wonderful, and you were telling some of what you have in the notes there in some more detail. There's other things in the notes, but just really gives you a sense of being there. You know,
Yeah,
like you're in that control room, basically immersed in.
And you know, I always say, don't speak while the flavor lasts, right? Marinate on it a little bit, because I think the record, for me, making records is also an ethical thing. And I don't, as a producer, my job really is to get an artist to perform to the limits of his potential. It's not about me putting my signature sound on it. So, like Roger Nichols is undisputed champion of Steely Dan, because he had a certain kind of sound.
Yeah.
My job was to tell the truth, to bring the artist forward in a way where there's perspective and understanding. Unraveling Whip It, for example, was really a treat because I recorded that 50 years ago. And to be able to use my original concept of monitoring the studio in quad, to be able to understand how the instruments spoke to one another, where the rhythms fell, and so forth, were very evident, and it made it very easy to do Dolby Atmos for that reason.
Yeah.
It was conceived that way, but a little earlier, I might say.
Yeah. I want to thank Robert for joining us today. Thanks
You're
for
very
coming in
welcome.
and chatting. We've got some really great stories, and you can hear sort of the background of freedom of choice. Make sure you order a pristine sounding high fidelity copy of that when it's available, and you can read Robert's notes, which are fascinating. So yes, thanks again. We loved
It was
having you
my
here.
great pleasure.
Thank you.